All right, so I have a very important question for you. If you had to pick just one thing, what makes the difference between good photos and bad photos? Okay, is it the exposure, the contrast, the color, the lighting? What is it? What's that one thing? Think about that. And then, more importantly, why does your photography suck? More specifically, why is it that you can be doing everything right? You can get the shutter speed down, the exposure, everything's dialed in. You've got the rule of thirds happening, you've got some leading lines. You take that photo and you look at it and you say, why is this so boring? Why is my photo looking so amateur? What's the difference here? So we're going to talk about both of those things inside this video, and I think the answer is going to surprise you. You ready? Let's do it. Hey, I'm Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside of this video, we're going to be talking about the difference between good photos, bad photos, and why your photography sucks. And specifically, what you can do about it, because until you figure out how to actually transcend that level of amateur all the way to a photographer whose work people like to look at, you're going to be having a hard time making progress. Okay, so we're going to head over to the computer of truth, justice, knowledge, information, and enlightenment, and I'm going to show you exactly what I think. Okay, bam, technology. All right, so here we have two comedy sketches, one by Paul Stark, one by Jack Carroll. And you might be saying, Ryan, what does this have to do with photography? And I would say you are very observant, young sir or madame, but this is going to have quite a lot to do with photography, so just bear with me, I'll explain, okay? Let's take a look here at the worst audition I could find.
Knock!
Who's there?
Funny! A funny joke!
So much silence. It actually I hurt for him. Now, keep that in mind. Why wasn't that joke funny, right? Obviously, it was a bad joke. That's what you might say. You might say, his delivery was off, or it was just a horrible joke. Probably, right? Well, let's compare that to this fellow right over here.
Don't worry, I know what you're thinking. Harry Potter's had a nasty Quidditch accident. Do you know what I can't stand? Sorry, let me emphasise. Do you know what I can't stand?
All right, massive difference between those two comedians, right? One was just groan-worthy, the other was actually funny. And why is it? What makes a joke funny? And if you can figure out the answer to that question, I think you're going to be well on your way to figuring out what makes the difference between a good photo and a bad photo, okay? Now, let me give you a hint. In comedy, the way that you actually make something funny, what makes a joke funny in the first place, is the surprise factor. So generally, you'll take a joke, you'll set it up, so you'll say, you know what, I know what you're all thinking, right? Like this guy. And you're like, okay, well, what am I thinking? He's in a wheelchair, right? But then he takes it and he flips it on its head in a way that surprises you. So he says, oh, Harry Potter's had a bad Quidditch accident, which... I wasn't thinking that at all, which is exactly why it's funny, because it's surprising in a way that you didn't expect, right? Okay, so bear that in mind. The level of surprise, the level of emotional response to the joke is actually what determines how funny it is. And you see this all the time when you're actually interacting with your friends, you're having a party or whatever, and all of a sudden somebody makes a joke that really wasn't that funny to begin with, but because you're hyped up on sugar or you're just having a fun time, things get carried away, and all of a sudden you're rolling on the floor and you don't even know what you're laughing about. Really, it wasn't the joke that was so funny, it was the level of emotional response that just kind of fed into it, and all of a sudden, you're having this amazing time, you're laughing, you're snorting milk out of your nose, and don't even know why. Okay, so think about this. The level of emotional response to a joke is what makes how funny it is, right? The same thing, if I could talk with actual words, the same thing happens in photography. So the level of emotional response that the viewer has to your photo is what determines how effective it is as a photo, as a piece of art. I might think that a photo is good, and you might think that that particular photo is bad, just based around what kind of response you have to it. And we see this all the time in all sorts of art forms. The level of emotion that is evoked is what determines whether or not somebody likes your photo or doesn't like your photo, or whether you like a painting at an art museum, or whether you think it's just blasé, right? So if you ever go to an art museum, so let's just look up art gallery here. I'm gonna head over into trusty Google Images. And I'm going to paint a picture for you. You walk into this art gallery and you don't really know what's going on, but you want to fit in, so you stand in front of this painting right over here. Okay? You take a look and you just take it in. And somebody beside you might look at this painting and say, that is absolutely amazing. They appreciate it. They see something that you just don't see. And you look at it and you're like, that's a painting of a fork. Or maybe you're in a really modern art gallery and it's literally just a fork, right? And it just shows you that art is so subjective, and really what makes good art versus what makes bad art, everyone's gonna have different opinions on that. There's some universal principles, but really what makes good art is something that touches you, something that speaks to you, something that really connects and resonates with you. And that's the really cool thing about photography, is that what makes a good photo, what makes a bad photo, it's really in the eyes of the beholder. And your ability to communicate what you feel and what you see and what you experience with somebody else, that's going to affect and determine how effective you are as a photographer. So if you can improve that, if you can improve as a storyteller, if you can improve in the level of emotion you're able to bring to your work, then you're going to improve your photography. So we're going to look at some different examples and ways to do that, but I hope that that's making sense and you're kind of resonating with that. I want to show you some examples here just to kind of communicate exactly what we're talking about. So I'm going to look up a photo of a wall, because when you're a beginner photographer, you go out and you just take photos of things and you don't really have, actually, that's not going to work because we have just stock photos, but you go out, you take photos of random things. So you might take a photo of a fence because you're like, you know what, leading lines, they're really cool. And you take a photo of a fence, like this one right here. Some guy went out, maybe he took this photo and he's really proud of it because it had leading lines, his composition was technically correct, his exposure is right, but you look at the photo and you say, that's ugly. It's not a nice photo. Why is that? Why isn't it a good photo? Well, I'm going to say probably the main reason here is I have no pleasing emotional response to this photo. I look at it and I see a lot of clutter. Sure, we have some leading lines, but we've got these fence posts and there's dirt on the ground and it's a really gray day, which to me is just more depressing than happy. And so why would I like this photo? There's the clutter of this tree and all sorts of colors that just sort of don't match properly. They're not cohesive. All of that is taking away from any possible emotional impact that this photo of a fence could have. And you might be saying, well, Ryan, it's really just because it's a photo of a fence. You can't take a photo of a wall or a fence that's interesting. Well, to that, I would say, how about if we were to look up the Berlin Wall? Okay, we look at a photo like this. Actually, this one right here. Smashing the Berlin Wall. Now, if you're younger than me and you don't know what this is, the Berlin Wall divided East and West Germany. It was constructed around World War II, and it basically separated families for generations. Now, when this wall came down, it was a big deal, and there was a lot of emotion behind that. And so because of what this photo represents, the actual tearing down of that divide between people groups, that's an amazing moment. It's an amazing emotion. And so I might see this photo, and it means a little bit to me, right? There's a lot of emotion attached to this photo of a wall. But to somebody who actually lived through it, to somebody who was there, this photo means so much more than I will ever be able to understand or feel. So that's the difference that emotion brings to photography and the emotional response that you have to a photo. Let's look at a few ways that you can actually do this and apply it in your photos. So if you are a beginner photographer or just a photographer in general, you're going to be taking photos of cats, right? Because A, cats are cute. B, you have one. C, you have a camera and you need something to take a photo of. So what do? I have also done this. You go out, you find the nearest cat, you take pictures of it. And most of the photos look kind of like this, right? Not a bad photo of a cat. Everything is kind of technically correct. We've got some leading lines going on. The cat is well framed in the scene. The lighting is decent. But there's really no emotional response, or let me rephrase, there's no strong emotional response to this photo because I don't really have a reason to respond to it. Now, how could we actually make this photo surprising, elicit more of an emotional response? Well, I, for one, think if there was a burrito right here, that to me would be a little surprising, right? So we've got a happy cat. He's happy over a burrito. That's something we don't see every day. Okay, that's kind of surprising. And you're going to find, if you actually do this, go into Google Images and you search for something like a cat, certain photos are going to provoke an emotional response and certain ones aren't. You're just going to skip past them. And most of the time, the good photos are the ones that give that strong response to you, whether that's through the beauty of the scene and just how amazing it is, whether it's a feeling of awe or wonder, or whether it's just hilarious or it's cute. Like, for example, this photo of a cat, to me, infinitely more interesting and infinitely more hilarious than that first photo. It actually captures the personality of that cat in this moment, in this action, and so it's actually interesting, right? And so that's the biggest difference, that you can that you can employ in your photography is most photographers, when you're starting out, you're just trying to figure out what is ISO, what is shutter speed, how do I set the right aperture, what lens should I use, what is leading lines, right? All these things are flying through your head and you're trying to figure them out. And you try and get them all technically correct. And that's good. It's good to learn and master those skills because they allow you to, do more in the future. But really, it's not about just getting those things right technically. It's about knowing how to use those things to tell the story you want to tell, to communicate the level of emotion that you want to communicate. And really, once you can get all of those things, the colors, the contrast, the exposure, the lighting, to work together cohesively, that's what makes a great photo. When everything is pointing towards that same message and it provokes the strongest possible emotional response to the story you're trying to tell. Okay, so let's look at some more photos of these cats and just look at the ones that kind of strike you the most. Which ones do you think are the most hilarious or the most funny or the most sad or the most cute? Most of the time it's because they have stronger emotions through the way that the photographer is communicating and through the moment that was captured. So we've got this photo of a cat, very blasé, just a white cat. If you really love Siamese cats, well, this one might be for you. But for me, kind of boring. Whereas right beside it, we have this angry, grumpy cat. And in every way, I relate to this photo because I've had several cats and they've all had this stage at one point or another. They get angry and it's just kind of hilarious, right? It's a cat and it's grumpy. Who doesn't like a grumpy cat? We've got this photo here of a cat hiding behind a tree. Now, that is very interesting and kind of cute, right? But because we've got a very busy background going on here, we've got all this grass and clutter and trees and branches and another cat, it looks like, in the background here. They're all distracting me from the main point of this photo, which is cat number 1 here, ducking behind the tree. So if we had done that, we would have had a stronger connection, probably a stronger emotional response to this photo because it was more focused. It was a famous sculptor who was once asked, okay, how do you sculpt these amazing sculptures of, say, an elephant? And the person said, well, I look at the block of marble and I take away everything that was not an elephant. And it's a silly example, but at the same time, when you think about it, that's really what we're trying to do in our photography, is we look at the photo and we say, okay, this is my purpose. And now how do I take away everything else that is not my purpose? Because everything else is clutter. Everything else is mess. Everything else is taking away from what I'm doing. How can I add to what I'm doing instead of taking away? Does that make sense? Okay, enough said on the cats. Let's put in something else. So we're going to put in landscape because most photographers like landscape photography. If you want to improve your landscape photography and take photos like this, well, yeah, it's going to take understanding the exposure and the lens and the f-stop and the lighting and making sure all those things are good. But it's also going to take figuring out how you can communicate emotion through your photo, because you can have a landscape photo of the exact same place and the emotion that is kind of evoked is totally different just depending on the lighting and the choice of the exposure and the choice of lens. So that's what really makes the difference between a good photo and just a subpar photo. So to illustrate this example, let's get 2 photos of the same place. So we're going to look up the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China. Okay, and let's look up, here we go. Now, this photo right here, great photo. Composition's pretty good. We've got some nice leading lines kind of happening here. The composition's decent. We're filling the frame with the Great Wall. The exposure's set all right, but the lighting is pretty harsh. It was taken in the middle of the day, and so the middle of the day, really, that light just doesn't feel good, right? You don't look at this wall and go, wow, that's an amazing sight. And when I think the Great Wall of China, if I were taking a landscape photo of it, I would want to just kind of communicate to the viewer exactly how huge it is, how great it is, and how awe-striking it is that people could work together to make this thing, right? I'm not getting that from this photo. Whereas if we look at a different photo, for example, this one. Now this probably, this has a lot of photoshopping going on, most likely. But we've got a different lighting experience, and we've got the Great Wall combined with the amazing night sky happening here. And that photo, even though the composition isn't that much different, is totally changing the way that I emotionally respond to this same place. Both photos are of the Great Wall of China. One of them I respond to, the other I really don't. Okay, so I hope that this is helpful. I hope it's making sense so far. If it is, do me a favor, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe and leave me a comment below. What do you think makes the biggest difference in communicating the emotion of your photos? Let's look at a couple more examples here. So let's look up, what else do people take photos of? People. Let's talk about wedding photos for a second, because this is something most photographers do. I find a lot of photographers, when you're starting out, you'll learn posing. And posing is great, it's foundational. But there's a big difference between a pose that is just being done and a pose that is actually being lived. And I know that sounds like really airy-fairy, but what I mean by that is if people are actually experiencing the moment, having an emotional response in your photo, that's going to be massively different to just a photo of people standing there. And if you're wondering why your photos aren't connecting with your audience, why people just aren't really responding, it's probably because they're not having much of an emotional response. And the easiest way you can do that when taking photos of people is not to take photos like this, photos where people are literally just standing there and not doing anything. Now, of course, this was ironically taken by a professional photographer, probably very expensive photo because we have a celebrity couple here. But my point is the same. I don't really respond or feel much about this photo other than maybe what I feel about Jay Beebs and his wife, right? Whereas if we have a photo of a couple walking down the aisle and absolutely like just caught up in the moment and loving each other, and there's some energy there's some actual expression on their faces, that to me is so much better as a photo. Now, you might disagree, and that's great. That's the beauty of photography, right? Is you're communicating and learning to communicate with other human beings what you experience and what you see and what you feel in this world. But I will say one thing. If you're trying to improve as a photographer, one of the biggest things that you can start doing, rather than focusing on what you like and rather than focusing on what you connect with, start thinking about, okay, who am I taking this photo for? If it's just for yourself, that's great. But if you're trying to get a response from somebody else, whether you're doing wedding photography and your client is a bride, or whether you're doing family photos, your client is a mom, or you know what I mean? Whether you're doing landscapes, and who's the person who actually is buying that photo or wants to have that photo? Think about what they like, what they connect with, what really means a lot to them, what memories they have, and try and tap into that emotionally. How can you connect with that person? And the deeper you can create that connection, the greater response you're going to have from your audience. So, in summary, the difference between a good photo and a bad photo, there's lots of little things, the exposure, the contrast, the lighting, all those things contribute, but what they're all contributing towards is really the emotional response it provokes in the viewer. Because you can have all those things technically wrong. You can have a very blurry photo. Let's actually see if we can find something. Blurry photo. Where all of the technical details were just wrong, but in that moment, because it's capturing the emotion, in fact, you can even use blur creatively. So the details aren't as important as the message that you're trying to get across and how well you communicate that, what kind of emotional response that you provoke in your audience. So if this video has been helpful, once more, hit that like button, make sure to subscribe, and share below, what do you think makes the biggest difference between good photography and bad photography? And now you know, if your photography sucks, you're just not happy with it, it's not emotionally resonating, well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're taking a photo of a pine cone, and as great as pine cones are, no one's ever going to see a pine cone and go, oh my gosh, my life has been changed. Or maybe they will. Maybe you'll figure out a way because you are talented as a photographer. Okay, I believe in you. I'm looking forward to helping you with more great content like this to just improve your photography, improve your mindset, improve all of those technical skills as well, and just give you the ability to become a better storyteller. So every day I'm shooting for, over the next month, I'm going to create a tutorial like this, and we're going to talk about all these basic things. So, camera settings and how we light our subjects and how we use all of these different tools to actually tell a story, how we can greatly enhance the emotional response that a viewer has to your photos, and just help you improve your photography. So if you're interested in that, once again, hit that like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you stay up to date on all the new videos as they come out. And if you have requests, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. All right, see you in the next video. Until then, go create something awesome. Peace.